I'm George Curtis. Welcome to It's Your Law. Each week it's my privilege to bring you programs that are educational to me and I hope to you about the law, how it's made, how it's enforced, how it's broken, how it's working, and how sometimes not so much, any of those things. A couple of weeks ago I read an interesting story in the Oshkosh Herald. In fact, I read it twice and it was so good that a member of my staff stole it and I don't have it today. But it was back a couple of weeks ago where I read some strange things that you would never expect to see in an Oshkosh paper. It was about our prison system. It says that we are the most locked up state in the most locked up country in the world. We spend more money on prisons than we do on a university system. The longer people are locked up, the more likely they are to repeat their crimes. The cost on the system is outrageously expensive, and it falls on the burden of the taxpayers who were insisting on tough enforcement of the law. And there are alternate programs that work a lot better, that don't lock people up or don't lock them up as long, that try to help them have healthier relationships with their families in the community and save the taxpayers money. We don't need to spend more money on jails and prisons, and we're trying some of those things in, of all places, Winnebago County. What's really shocking is the interview was with a prosecutor, our district attorney. His name is Christian Gossett, and he's our guest today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Did I read that correctly?
And we may not be the most incarcerated state out of the 50 states, but we're above average, and we're certainly in the most incarcerated country in the world. In the United States, we lock up about 700 people per 100,000. If we look to our neighbors to the north in Canada, I believe they're at about 114 people per 100,000, and a lot of European Union countries are around 140 per 100,000. So as far as industrialized first world countries, nobody's close to where we are, and we're so far removed from everybody else that I think we seriously need to spend a lot of time examining ourselves and trying to figure out where we went wrong and what are we doing that everybody else has figured out there's better ways to do.
Who pays for this?
This is all on the taxpayers. I think at the federal level, you're talking about around $182 billion a year between the federal correctional system and the supporting entities. And in Wisconsin, you're talking over $1 billion a year for the state taxpayers.
And it has an impact on the families of the people who are locked up because they're dependent on a wage earner who isn't earning any wages.
Yeah, that's correct. We all lose on this. So when we put people in prison, I guess there's always going to be people who should be in prison. But there has to be a distinction between people that we're mad at and people that we're afraid of. And incarceration should be used for people that we're afraid of. It shouldn't be for people that we're mad at. And so in Wisconsin, the comparison that we see all the time is Wisconsin versus Minnesota. Wisconsin's sitting somewhere around 25,000 people in prison. Minnesota is sitting around 10,000. And I believe they spend around $588 million per year on their prison population, their incarcerated population, whereas we're over $1.1 billion. And at a state level, states compete with each other on all sorts of issues, including education and things of that sort. So we have to look at what other states are doing and how they're solving their problems and see, is Wisconsin advancing our population, or are we holding our population back?
Well, traditionally, people have been elected, probably everywhere, but certainly in the state of Wisconsin, for being tough on crime. Tommy Thompson was somebody I knew professionally and personally, and he was a governor, I think, longer than anybody else, so obviously the public was buying it. And one of the things that he was famous for is truth in sentencing, which meant, I think, that if people got a term of a specific number of months or years, they had to serve it. They weren't going to get a break, a probation, a good time, a parole or something like that. And he recently was quoted that that's his only regret as a governor, that he pushed that through and it turned in retrospect to be a very, very bad idea.
Yeah, and and it's interesting. The Thompson Foundation. Now, I spoke at one of their events. I think it was either this year or last year, and the Thompson Foundation is now very interested in criminal justice reform, and so they wanted to know what we were doing in Winnebago County and how we're addressing some of these issues. And when we go back to the 80s, the early 90s, our world looked different, and our state looked different, and our country looked different, and there was a lot of more serious crime, and we saw some serious upticks in crime, I think probably starting around the 70s or so. And so the response in our country became, let's lock everybody up. If we lock everybody up, we'll be safe, and we'll teach people not to do this. We had the Scared Straight program for kids, and so there was a reason that we did that. Interestingly, when you look at the data, though, at some point, crime drops. And that's where the rest of the world's incarceration, it goes up and it comes down. The United States kept going up. We got put on this trajectory where we decided that the best solution to every conceivable problem in society was the criminal justice system and incarceration. And we never stopped to say, well, maybe we should look at other ways of dealing with these problems.
Well, Christian, let's take our first break, and when we come back, I'm going to have you explain there is a relationship between how long people are sentenced and the likelihood of them falling into recidivism. We'll be right back. Welcome back to It's Your Law. I'm George Curtis, and my guest is our District Attorney, Christian Gossett. There have been studies made as to the relationship between the length of time that a prisoner serves and the likelihood of recidivism. What do those studies tell us?
So when we look at, in particular, low-level offenders, so we were talking a little earlier about the criminal or the response that our society has really relied on for every type of infraction is incarceration. And when we look at low-level offenders, so young people or people who haven't been in the system before, if we incarcerate them for as little as 24 hours, we see about a 17% increase in recidivism. If we go 2, 3, 4 days, that increase in recidivism can get up into the 42% area. And so interestingly, when we over-arrest, we over-incarcerate, specifically young people, low-level offenders in general, we're actually making our own problem worse, because that means that more of these people are going to come back to us in the future, as opposed to if we did a lower level of intervention to try to redirect them and get them to a level of behavior that is acceptable in society and in our community. So by being too aggressive on low-level offenders, we actually create more criminal problems.
And we do over-incarcerate, but we also do over-arrest, especially people of color.
Yeah, and that's something that our country has had to struggle with. In fact, we were talking about Wisconsin's incarceration problems. Wisconsin also has the most incarcerated zip code in the country, a community in Milwaukee, primarily black neighborhood. And when we look throughout the criminal justice system, it doesn't matter what data we look at, we see racial disparities. And it's a problem that as a society we have to reconcile, we have to recognize, and we have to figure out. And when we start looking at younger people and low-level offenders, if we can take action to redirect these people early on in inappropriate behavior and get them to an acceptable level, we could forego this continual increase of criminal recidivism and incarceration.
Well, you're not just talking about this as district attorney. You're doing something about it, and of course it's high risk. You're an elected official, and the worst thing that an elected district attorney can project is that he is soft on crime. Now, I know you're not soft on crime, but at the same time, people who have been the victims of an offender might think, that you're soft on crime because you've analyzed this scientifically and you have other approaches other than maximum convictions, maximum sentences, and no other options. What are some of the other options that seem to be under consideration and actually being implemented here in Winnebago County?
Yeah, so what we do is we always talk about we've developed a system of being smart on crime, and so Winnebago County is an interesting place in part because there's 71 district attorneys' offices or criminal justice systems in Wisconsin. We have the highest felony conviction rate here in Winnebago County. But we also divert probably 10 to 15% of the people, maybe even 20% of the people that come into our office. And so what we've learned to do is identify the serious offenders, the people who scare us, and we get convictions on those people at a higher rate than anybody else. But then we take our low-level offenders and we look to see what's going on with them. So we complete risk needs assessments. We do mental health screens. We look at what's holding them back from being successful. What are their needs? What can we do to lift them up? And we've developed all of these partnerships in the community with Fox Valley Technical College, with local law enforcement, the Oshkosh Area School District, all of our county school districts. Everybody has come to the table to try to help solve these problems. And we now have 90 different conditions that we can pick and choose from. So after we do this battery of assessments on individuals, we can put together an individualized program for each person, for hundreds of people per year, to try to lift them up and resource them and give them the tools they need. And one of my favorite programs, in fact, is a partnership with Fox Valley Technical College, where we can send low-level offenders to the technical school, and they will teach them study skills. They'll help them get a high school diploma. They'll do some career exploration with them, and we'll try to get them enrolled in a regular technical college program, because one of the things that we know is if people have meaningful employment and a future with employment, they're less likely to engage in criminal activity. So we're trying to meet the defendants where they are. We're trying to resource them, provide them the tools to be successful, and then the problem's solved.
Absolutely. With education, with success, it helps everybody. They pay taxes, they shoulder their responsibility in the community, they're more likely to be successful in their family relationships, their marriages, raising their children, contributing to the community. It's refreshing how many people say, I have a record, but now I have a great job, and now I contribute at the YMCA, the Boys Girls Club, or something like that, or my church, and they really relish the second opportunity, and that's what you're trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes what gets lost in the criminal justice rhetoric is these are people who don't want to have the problems that they have. The people that we deal with we see overrepresentation for people struggling with poverty, AODA issues, mental health issues. If we took those three things out of the criminal justice system, we'd have almost nobody left. And you don't fix substance abuse issues and addiction through incarceration. You fix it through treatment and rehabilitation. Same thing with mental health. Mental health, when we're screening people, I believe 38% of the people that we screen positive for mental health issues. Now, that doesn't mean that they have a mental illness where they can't control their behavior, but if we're going to help stabilize them, we need to understand what's happening with them. And so often it's co-occurring conditions of alcohol or drug abuse and mental health. So we see people, trying to address their own mental health issues with substances, and then we end up with this dual diagnosis problem where we've got to get in and fix it. And until we get that under control, they're just sort of lost.
I want you to hold that thought because we're about ready to take our second break. But you put in my mind my own experiences. More than 50 years ago, I was a part-time city prosecutor, and 90% of the problems, it was in northern Wisconsin, related to alcohol. Okay. Now that has changed. We still have problems with alcohol. We're a drinking state, there's no question about it. But there's a new demon, the drugs, and when we come back, I want you to address that.
Absolutely.
We'll be right back. Welcome back to It's Your Law. I'm George Curtis. My guest is District Attorney Christian Gossett. We're talking about the criminal justice system, what works and what doesn't, and we're all learning. It's a kind of a changing target, and we have to adjust to it and treat it from the education that we're getting by experience. We left off the last segment talking about alcohol and drugs. Are they still a part of the picture?
And so I think where we always start our assessments for the community is, what's causing deaths? Certainly, I think most people are aware of the opioid epidemic and the methamphetamine epidemics. And so last year, I believe we had 72,000 people who died as a result of overdose deaths. I think fewer people are aware that we had about 88,000 alcohol-related deaths. And so those are serious issues that we need to address. And another one that sometimes isn't looked at in conjunction with the criminal justice system, but I think we can't ignore it because it does result in death, is suicides. And so suicides are very high and continue to increase, and we're often talking about some sort of mental health issue underlying those. So when we look at these three things, that's where we need to focus our attention as a society: is substance abuse, mental health, and try to fix what is causing deaths in our community.
Now, you actually are doing some of these things differently in Winnebago County, and I think our audience deserves an explanation. What are you trying to do differently, and how's it going?
So we're doing several different things differently. As simple things like operating after revocation. People have revoked driver's licenses, so they get arrested, and we used to put those people in jail. Now we try to get those people licensed. We work with them. If we can get them a valid driver's license, we solve the problem. Everybody wins. If we put them in jail for 30 days, then the taxpayers pay $1,800. The person still doesn't have a driver's license, and they still have to get to work. And so we're trying a lot of solution-based ideas. And so everything from job skills. We're trying to teach people job skills. We're looking at working with second chance employers now. We have a lot of companies that need employees, and we have a lot of people who are kind of on the fringe, where if we stabilize them and get them employment, everybody wins. Our employers have more employees. People now have a future that they can look forward to. We're doing AODA treatment with people, trying to address the drug issues. We just got a grant. We have a partnership with New York University. So the Winnebago DA's office and NYU have a partnership in which we've received a grant to do medication-assisted treatment. So our opioid users, we're able to provide them with Vivitrol shots, which inhibit or block the opioid from providing the high, and it lasts for about a month. The shots are very expensive, I think $1,200 or more per shot. So we have a grant that we can use to try to help with treatment. So we're trying to address every issue that we see coming through the criminal justice system by first asking, is there a way we can solve the underlying problem, before we simply jump to, let's punish the person for having the addiction in the first place. Let's punish the person for not having the driver's license. We know these people did something wrong that got them there, but can we help them solve the problem first?
Well, on a more specific note, I'm aware of the problems that some of the immigrants are having nationally and locally, and we rely on them heavily for labor here in our agricultural area. If they happen to be undocumented, and it can take them 25 years to get citizenship, and they work in a dairy farm, they have no choice but to drive at 3 o'clock in the morning for their shift of milking the cows. And under our current Wisconsin law, undocumented people can't get a driver's license, so they're driving without a license, and then of course eventually they'll get arrested for driving without a license unless they leave the scene of the accident, which is even worse. So we've created a trap for those people and for our farmers and for the economy. Sometimes we have to look at this with a long view of the social justice at issue, with a long view of the economy. We need those people. Similarly, the other folks that you're talking about, they're going to do a lot better, and we're all going to do better if they can live at home instead of in the jail. If they can work, if they bring a check home for their families and participate in the community. So a lot of what you're talking about is social justice, isn't it?
It is, and you touched on something that I think a lot of times people forget. You know, when we incarcerate somebody, it's not just the cost of incarcerating them. You know, we talk about those exorbitant costs, and they are exorbitant costs. But when we take somebody out of their employment situation, you know, then oftentimes we're dealing with families. So you incarcerate one parent. You know, now the family doesn't have child care, so the other person can't work because they are usually, you know, we're talking about people again in poverty. So if one person can't work, they're incarcerated, the other person can't work because they're staying home with kids. We perpetuate these cycles. And the medical community always, they have the adage, you know, first do no harm. And I think we need to apply that to the criminal justice system with some reasoning. And so simple things like an operating after revocation, I say simple, but it does cause big problems, as you indicated, with crashes and things. If we can get people licensed instead of punitively just taking their license and giving them no way to get to work, now we're not only paying for the incarceration, but now we're paying to support them because they don't have a job. Because we're not going to let families and children starve to death. So as taxpayers, we're going to fund them now. And as you know, Social Security is based on your highest 35 years earnings. If we take people out of the employment area or arena for a decade, all of a sudden when they get to their retirement years, we're supporting them then as well, in addition to you know, supporting them while they're going through life. So we have to stop these cycles. And the incarcerated, or the way that we do this with incarceration just doesn't work. We're not providing any long-term solutions. We're disrupting their lives. We're costing our communities a lot of money and producing no long-term results. And we've got to try to figure out if we can produce positive long-term results first and use incarceration last.
I was shocked and pleased to read the article in the Oshkosh Herald, and then I thought I shouldn't be shocked. You know, Christian Gossett has always thought about it a little further, dug a little deeper, and hasn't knee-jerk reaction to get reelected by saying we're going to lock them up and throw away the key. And that makes for a very, very risky thing for a guy who's going to be running for re-election, but it's really great public service. And I thank you for being on the show.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
And thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Christian Gossett is always an interesting, thoughtful person to have on this program or any program. He has studied the problem and the solutions. He's taken lessons from the Minnesota experience, where they do less incarcerating and more people are finishing college, more people are getting trades, more people are employed, and fewer people are in prison. He's applied those lessons and other studies right here at home where it counts to you and me. In Winnebago County, he persuaded the county board we didn't have to spend millions and millions of dollars of taxpayer-paid and earned money for jails. We needed fewer people jailed, more people at home, more people getting an education, more people supporting their own families and rebuilding those relationships at home. Christian Gossett is right. He's not soft on crime. He has a better way of solving and preventing crime, and we should be grateful. I'm George Curtis, and that's my opinion.